Oh yeah. Now that I unmuted myself, it should work. Apologies, hard.
Carol, when I go over this to type something, it just goes like that.
Thanks. I can type, so okay, something. Okay.
Here you go. Can you guys hear us now?
Confirm that you can hear us, so that's great.
Not much to video. It's like to delete.
Has anyone got audio now? Can you guys tell us if you have audio? Hooray! Excellent.
Beautiful. Sorry for the rocky start. That happens. All right, let's start.
Yes, so probably the best thing
Should we all introduce ourselves? I think
that may not be a bad idea, actually.
So before we introduce ourselves, actually, welcome to the first contributor stand-up, which is live. Yeah, we made it in 15 minutes. Next time it's gonna be it's gonna be 13 next time. Gonna go down. And before we start introducing ourselves, I want to just remind people that the goal of this stand-up is really targeted at contributors of CoreFX repo. We want to kind of open the bi-directional channel, hear out our contributors, what are their ideas, what are their pain points, things that we are missing, and how we can help them to be successful in our repo, mainly CoreFX at this moment. Logistically wise, we're gonna be monitoring the live chat, so if you have any questions or something, put it there, and whatever will be easy, we might answer on the spot, and the rest we're gonna leave for the last part of the session. I think it's a good time to introduce ourselves. So Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a dev lead on the base class libraries. I'm not the only one, but so I own a bunch of things like the collections and the primitive types.
All right. No need to introduce Imo, I guess, or maybe.
Well, I can still do it. So I'm Will Edward. I'm a PM on the .NET team. So I work on probably what most people know is .NET Standard, but I also work on the base class libraries. We spec features like the Symfony support that we did a while ago, and like some of the other stuff that we own.
I'm Wes Aggert, former dev lead, now engineering .NET Standard, .NET libraries, pretty much everywhere around .NET, CoreFX in particular.
All right, and I'm Karel Zikmund. I'm as well dev lead on the BCL class libraries or on BCL. And I try to step up into role a bit of community management, so make sure that our contributors are happy. All right.
Okay.
So that's it for introductions. And as next step, we would like to, we prepared kind of brief list of things that are happening on CoreFX repo for people to know. Again, if you have quick questions, feel free to fire it. If the answer might take longer, we might leave it to the last part of the session.
Do you want to put the link to this in the chat, maybe?
Actually, the questions are not there. But yeah,
okay.
You can, and it's actually in the feed, originally on the feed. So we prepared, just to say like a few things that are happening right now on the repo. So first of all, you might have noticed that we are, kind of focused on delivering great .NET Core 2.0. So we shipped that probably more than a month ago, 1.5 months, I believe. And we're still looking at things that we broke by accident, and we're trying to ship them in servicing release or in servicing releases. You should expect that there will be roughly, 2 months period of shipping servicing updates. And it's kind of call for action for all the contributors. If you guys notice that something is broken in .NET Core 2.0 against either previous versions or against desktop, it's something that we definitely want to know about and consider for fixing. Anything, guys, you want to add? The other thing, the team is actually, or non-trivial part of the team is focused on build infrastructure, kind of the build from source effort, which is not quite ideal. Maybe Wes can say a couple of things about that.
We've got, first, those that paid attention, we have like a source build repo that's going to be used as our base sort of thing to build the full .NET Core product. We're going to submodule all the other repos that make up the full .NET Core product.
It's like 20 or 30 or something like that. Non-trivial number, right?
The core ones, and then there's the SDK ones. The core ones basically are core setup, CoreFX, core CLR, standard repo. And then there's the SDK repo and CLI. All the stack. The goal is to basically be able to build a full CLI SDK piece from source, so we can easily bring up new distros and other sorts of things and insert into distro owners can actually start to build the product, the full product.
So you will see changes in that area. It might impact actually even the CoreFX infrastructure, how we build and things. And this project will probably run over at least a few months. Like it's good. Okay.
It's going to be ongoing. We're going to hopefully get it to a workable state in a few months, but there's still going to be lots of work.
Okay. All right. The other thing that is happening or happened recently, I think it was this Tuesday, that at the .NET Conf we announced Windows compatibility pack for .NET Core, which is actually heavily impacted on the CoreFX repo. On the slide from Scott Hunter, we had things like that we're gonna ship a pack with Microsoft Win32 registry, code DOM, configuration, drawing, and other things. I think that eventually among them will be directory services. Anyway, so this is coming. The preview is already available, right?
Yeah, went out on Tuesday.
Perfect.
The preview contains two parts. One is everything that we already shipped in 2.0 that wasn't in the shared framework, so that you don't get a free reference to. So it's already available on NuGet, but you had to find it. So that just pulls everything in for free. And then the other thing it has is system drawing, which incidentally also includes an evolution of the mono system drawing implementation. So it works for Unix too. And then for final release, which will be later this year, we'll include a whole bunch of other things. We know some things will certainly be in there, like perf counters, event log, system ODBC, and a bunch of others. And then some we're trying to make happen. We don't know yet about system management, system directory services we hope to have in there. And then there's a few others. So, and that should be later this year.
So yeah, if you guys want to jump in and help with some of those things, if you're interested in them, this is the right time. And actually, on some of these things, we had actually some significant contributions from community, especially on drawing, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure about configuration and actually some of on the directory services as well. All right, so 3 more things that are happening on the repo I have here. So you might have noticed that we have kind of created a backlog of API reviews over the summer. We weren't that fast. People were on vacations and things. So we are now like at 12, 15 or something like that. So we will be catching up over the next couple of weeks or few weeks. So just FYI that it might take a little bit. If you see something that is really you think is critical, let us know. Overall, I believe that all those APIs should be, approved in next couple of months. So if someone wants to get them into 2.1, that I don't see a problem of that. Again, I can't promise they will be actually approved. I can promise that they will be reviewed. That's actually a different thing. The other two. Go ahead.
Can we address some of the questions in the chat?
Sure.
One of the questions I think Jonathan was asking whether or not our source build stuff is going to help with the VS Code editing for contributors.
Using VS Code?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and there's some confusion. I think yes, we do have VS IntelliSense for obviously for .NET Core like apps and stuff, but CoreFX is a little bit of a different beast because we don't use standard projects. We are hoping to move to more of SDK-based projects after we get the shift, and we can actually start consuming the 2.0 SDK within CoreFX, and I think that will help a lot with the tooling for the projects for other platforms.
Another angle actually on the
worthwhile explaining why that is. Like one of the problems that we have is that because we are building the platform, right, we can't quite consume the platform like our customers do. So most of the tooling that we have makes assumptions around how the system is laid out, and like bootstrapping ourselves with that public tooling is a lot harder. I mean, high-level repos like ASP.NET or Roslyn, who basically compile the same way that the customers compile, have a much easier time getting the tooling story off the ground. Yeah. But I think it's fair to say that it has always been a pain point in our team that effectively you can use ultra-edited Sublime text, but not really Visual Studio.
But to answer actually the question about I think that the key root question here is will VS Code be able to be used for developing CoreFX? So Dan actually on his whiteboard we have a list of like 20 things that we want to invest, and this is actually one of them. We discussed it just yesterday. So we hope that we will be able to put in next month or two someone on that to kind of dig a little bit deeper and make it more, at least better for the contributors to use VS Code.
But what does it work? Is it actually required to pull it off?
We don't know actually it works, and I think that Jonathan already told us that it actually doesn't work.
We override tons of targets and other things, and loading up our stuff in VS Code still causes some grief.
It works in VS. It does work in VS Code.
Yeah. barely works in VS most of the time too. So.
So, Jonathan, I assume you're on Mac, right? Not Linux. I'd be interested in any other feedback you have offline about, the development experience in CoreFX on Mac, because some people do it here. There are some people who work primarily or exclusively on Mac, but most of us work on Windows, and so sometimes we can be a bit short-sighted about the Mac authoring experience.
Okay.
The other question that popped up was when is system drilling being implemented? We just released a beta of it on Tuesday.
Yep.
System drilling.
Yep, it's done. There's actually a bug which prevents it working on Mac, but that was a typo. That's been fixed. So the next release will have that working. But I know of no significant bugs or significant work remaining on it. It is marked a preview package, but it's good to go.
It's available. Yeah. So the other two things that are happening on CoreFX repo, you might have noticed that span of T and friends are kind of being, we're trying to kind of spread it around in CoreFX repo, adding a bunch of new APIs in that regard, and the goal is to have actually, significant part of that done in 2.1. There's actually a call for action for contributors that, we could definitely use some help in implementing some of these, spanified APIs in CoreFX. And the last thing you might have noticed that we are lately doing actually larger API reviews and migration of some components from CoreFX Lab in All right. Do you have any questions or anything?
We lost the sound and the pitch.
I don't know why that is happening.
Interesting.
I've not touched any of the controls.
Don't touch it even more.
It's like non-deterministic, this thing.
Okay, let's see if it works. So the next step, we should probably go, try 5. We should go to the first topic that we picked, or it was upvoted most, which is the API review process and meetings. So we don't project that, right? So it doesn't matter.
Okay. I have to say
Yeah, you don't have to. That's okay. Like people can probably
away from the keyboard anyway.
So I bring in here the cheat sheet of the issue number 10 over here. So as most of you guys are probably aware of the API process that we have it documented in GitHub repo. I would say that it's mostly true. I think there are some details missing, and that those are things probably we should talk about a little bit. And I think that key thing that is not quite popping out of the document is that our API review process is actually multi-staged. That we rely in the first stage on the area owners or experts to kind of think about the API, look at it, and do kind of first level approval. That like, yeah, this looks like a good idea. It fits the space, might be a good thing. Once we have that, in the first stage, actually, you don't get the bigger API, API design group involved, and that's by design. Because that group would be super busy if it would comment on very early, ideas for every single API. And once the API is kind of approved or approved, like, considered a reasonable thing to bring forward, the area expert actually mark it as API ready for review. And then when it gets actually to the formal API group, and actually you can see over here in this room, there are like all 4 of us are actually part of that group. On top of that, it's Stephen Taub, Krzysztof Swalina, Jeremy Barton, and probably actually a bunch of other people I missed who are joining us here and there.
Barry Dorrance comes to mind. Barry Dorrance comes to mind when we discuss secure string.
Yeah, well,
yeah, we usually pull in like the expert, right? So if it's crypto, we're not going to do it without Jeremy and so forth. Maybe it's implicit, but we could briefly mention why the API process is so onerous, because it is. And it's probably obvious, but like once we have an API, it lasts forever. So we still support APIs that shipped in 2002. So that's one reason we have to stand by that API. We don't want to have duplication later, so we want to get it right. And another is API design is actually quite a subtle thing. Sometimes folks who haven't done this before, they think, well, I want food to do bar, and so we'll just put a bar method on. Actually, there's a lot of other things to consider, like discoverability, like composability, like performance, and so forth, consistency, and many other things. And one of the attractions of the .NET platform for many people is that in many places we got that right. Some places we definitely didn't, and I guess we want to not lose that value prop. So hopefully we get the right balance between pain and benefit.
Yeah.
I want to share like a little bit here. So why are we bothering with reviewing APIs? Because stuff like this happens, right? This was an API that somebody added, and I think it was part of Windows 8 when they added the API. And they didn't intend this to be a public API, obviously, but like they just had it for the time being. I think the comment here is actually updated a while ago, but the comment originally read obsolete. This is a temporary API until the CLR team gives us an official API to detect this. And like we ended up shipping the API because the framework is large and we completely missed the API for some reason. But like we do this on an ongoing basis that we essentially div the API surface with what we have shipped last time to see whether anything has sneaked up and like we just missed it. And like if you look at the framework, as Dan said, I mean we have a 250,000 APIs in the .NET framework, so it is substantially in size. And like it's not that people don't think about their APIs. For the most part, we don't get like terrible API proposals, but it's always the case that team A needs to do something, and then team B realizes that we have something there, maybe we should collaborate. And like if you're having a centralized review board, you make your life a lot simpler to see essentially the set of like asks that are like consistent, and then maybe there needs to be a centralized API rather than two teams building the same thing. And then on top of that, I mean, like Christos Solina wrote this book, Framework Design Guidelines, which is like 350 pages long at this point, or something like that. And it has all the do's and don'ts of API design. But like, it is fair to say that nobody has the book in their head all the time, not even Christoph. So API design is always a team effort where you poke holes at the design, and you question whether the API will version properly. You question whether the API will work properly in all cases. I mean, we have this random joke on the team where we say you can always ask the question, what serialization impact does API may introduce, right? Like, I mean, there's some things that are just fundamentally complicated, and if you don't think through these things at some point, like as Dan said, you only have one shot, right? And then the best you could do for this API, for example, is obsoleting it. Would be like even this API we can never remove.
And we don't want to put obsolete attributes on anymore. So
there's that too, because obsolation doesn't really work either.
And so sometimes the discussions can get not heated, but like pretty passionate, right? But what's interesting to me is it's hard to think of a time when I've ended up leaving the room being unhappy at the results. I've usually gotten persuaded that I was wrong. So it seems to work.
And actually trying to be a little bit more open in those things. So lately, you might have noticed that we started recording some of the sessions, API review sessions. And as soon as the discussion is not too passionate, we are actually more than happy to release those things. So we did one like 3 weeks ago, and actually from this Tuesday, we're gonna again release the video. So that's our way how to try to kind of give people as well idea what's happening behind the scene. We don't want to kind of open every single design review meeting and have it live or streaming or anything like that. The reason is that we want like all participants to feel encouraged to speak about anything, and sometimes it's just not ready to be published. So
I would also say like it's the question is like what kind of like why are we doing this in the first place, right? Or why are we sharing those review meetings? I mean the goal that we have is education, right? We want to make sure that the community understands how we're thinking about the problem space, what kind of discussions we're having. But in the end, like, let's not forget each of these meetings is 2 hours long usually, because design meetings, you cannot do much design in like half an hour essentially, which basically results in like people are, what?
The camera. Look at the camera. That's all.
Oh, I see. Yeah, basically the problem is that we have there's only so much time in a day, right? And like if we upload every single video that we do, And then quite frankly, nobody is watching them either, right? Like people are not going to like watch hours and hours of us talking over the same thing over and over again. Like I think there is value in like doing this on an ongoing basis, but even if you miss 5 of them, like there should be very limited surprises. Like
I think
result is always visible anyway.
I think you're right. I don't think it's a goal we have that for someone to be able to see the video of their particular API request being discussed. Like I think the overhead to us of doing that is too high. But yeah, some example ones that I think is helpful, and we'll continue to do that.
I mean, like if you take it to an extreme, you can all buy body cams, right, and like run around and like stream 24/7. But then the question really is, who's going to watch that, and like, is that actually helping the community, right? I think in many cases, like writing up the principles and sharing the the viewpoints that we have is a much more effective way to like get the point across.
Plus, key value from that I see is sometimes when someone is interested in some API and like, okay, so I wonder why they end up with this set of principles. Actually, if there's a link, you can go and watch it. So, we don't expect anyone to watch the whole sessions, much more as a reference when there's interest and specific interest.
If folks online have any questions, just type and we'll jump in.
Yeah. The only other thing I would add, like the other reason why I like this community videos is also that you can actually see a face to the discussion. It's not just the anonymous guide, developer unit 76A commented on a GitHub issue and said the API is bad. Like, I mean, if it's an actual name, a person, a face, I think it's actually helping the interaction quite a bit.
We do all have photos in GitHub, I think, now.
You do, but
I mean, how hard it is to convince engineers to put their photos there? Yes, I'm doing that on
Still 1 or 2 puppies.
Yes.
And,
Oh, there's someone has a shape of himself or something.
That's right.
We all the shape. No, I mean, like I think the other thing is that many people know channel 9 probably, right? I mean, channel 9 was the idea that we stream a little bit like from inside the Death Star to the outside world and like give people a sneak peek into how software engineering is done at Microsoft, and we kind of do the same here for open source. So it's not something that we invented, right?
So, a question from Tanner, who's actually
on the C# team.
Is on the C# team. Thanks, Tanner. You can pop down the hallway if you like. I think one of the things that would help with API reviews is that it isn't immediately obvious where your API is in the list of pending reviews after it's been marked as ready for review. So it can look like it sits as ready for review for 2 months without an update. Right. Sometimes I think that actually happens, unfortunately.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, that probably, you're being very polite, Tanner. I think we could probably have a more formal system around that. Like sometimes we sort by oldest, but sometimes someone actually wants to write code that day, and so we pull that up. We probably could do better, and I think maybe there's a bit of a backlog built up.
Yeah. I mean, that's a general problem that I discussed with Carol at some point, and I don't know how you guys think about that, but if you look at all of our repos, whether it's Roslyn or CoreFX or ASP.NET, like we all have at least 1,000 issues. Most of them actually have more than 1,000 issues. And I think with
unfortunately, we are 2,000 now. Yeah.
Like I think the reality is that, I mean, we originally said we want to keep things open with the intention that, because we all grew up in the good old days where, we did this 3-year release cycles, and then towards the end of every release cycle, there's this massive push to resolve all bugs, and then we bulk resolve a ton of them and say, you know what, we're out of time, like resolve, go and fix, essentially, right? And as an engineer, we all hate that because we don't want to leave work undone and we don't want to make customers unhappy. But the reality is also, if you have a backlog of 1,000 or 2,000 items, you're not going to groom the backlog on an ongoing basis anymore because you cannot just go through all the pages and see the 5 really important things in it. So it's a little bit of like, getting lost in the details, that kind of thing. So I'm actually more or less of the opinion that we should probably be more aggressive with closing issues with the downside, of course, that we will close issues that may not be a bad idea. It's just that we don't see ourselves doing it in the next.
So that doesn't apply to API ready for review, right? Those guys, ideally, we would plow through all of them. I think the backlog is where this API needs work. No one's groomed that.
But even if you look at the APIs that are ready for review or like marked for API edition, there's a decent amount of them. It's not like 3 pages. I mean, we did a lot of work to make it into 3 pages, but this is similar in the sense that we basically said more aggressively, no, or not ready. And I think the problem is sometimes the question is, how much work do we want to spend to make an API ready for review, right? In many cases, somebody says, I wish there was an API to do X, but they're not actually proposing a design for X. So somebody else has to pick up the work. And then the question is, well, do we let the issue sit here, or do we just close it and say, like, if you come back with a design, we can talk about it otherwise?
So speaking of which, that's actually something I wanted to mention, that we agreed on that 3 weeks ago, that we're going to do a small tweak actually to the API labeling that we're gonna, right now we're using the API needs work for all incoming new ideas, which we might not even buy them yet, or we don't even understand if they're valuable. And it's mixed up with things we actually think like, oh, this is valuable, it really just needs a little bit of more work, or maybe it came back from the API review to kind of incorporate feedback. So our plan is actually to, it's on me, hopefully next few weeks, to actually introduce API suggestion label, which is going to be basically the label for all incoming stuff. And part of that, we're gonna groom a little bit all the API needs work right now, especially those markup for grabs. And if there hasn't been honestly interest in a year or two from anyone to create a formal proposal or push it farther, and it doesn't look like a slam dunk great idea, we're likely gonna be more aggressively closing those. So expect that.
I think the other mode that we had internally was that teams would not review the API. Hey Tanner,
how's it going?
So internally, what some teams have done is that they basically work on the feature without waiting for approval for the design, right? And then they basically come, with enough buffer to change the API, but they're not blocked by the review, right? I think the problem with the community is that they feel they're blocked by our approval, which to a certain extent is true, because the approval is basically what you need in order for us to make the decision that we want to ship the design that you have. For a partner team internally, I mean, they can ship their own bits. We cannot tell them no. We can only tell them that the way they have done it is incorrect, but we cannot really prevent them from shipping it. But I do think there's some sort of a problem, I think, in our way we work, that it seems like the process is too heavyweight too early. I think like it would be better if we could get to a mode where people can collaborate among themselves to the point where they feel that the design is baked enough, and it's only the question of like, what's the shape of the API? What's the name? Like, is it an interface? Is it an abstract base class and whatever? And that seems like something that we can also turn around faster than the discussion of like, oh, should we do X or Y to begin with? And I think some of the discussion seem also a bit early, because the people proposing the design don't have a fully baked view of what problem they're trying to solve in the first place. They have a hunch that there is a problem, but it makes the discussion somewhat like a long one.
So that's a segue to how you can make an API review meeting more efficient. And there's a wide range, and thanks to folks who've been following the template or something similar, that helps a lot. I think for us to be effective in an API review, we need the API actually written out, like formatted as code, but we also need like a definition of like the problem you're trying to solve, alternatives considered, sample code and usage is very important. And then one thing that really helps is, as discussion continues, to go update the top post. Now, we as a matter of policy, except in extreme circumstances, don't want to edit anyone's post. The only exception I can think of is when we go and add code formatting, and then we put a little note saying we formatted it. So that means that we can't generally do that. So if you create an API issue and then there's a bunch of discussion, please don't post further down, okay, I'm changing the design to blog alone. Go up and edit it. So that the ideal API review meeting is we just look at the top post. It's really hard and inefficient for 5 or 6 people to like read a long thread. And
the other thing that people seem to, not be aware of necessarily, even though it may sound trivial, but it's similar to debugging, right? Every time somebody submits you a bug report, it's surprising how often developers don't give the details you need to act on the bug, whether the stack trace, the error message, whatever it is, right? And it's the same with APIs. Like, I mean, we're not domain experts in every single technology that our team owns, or the .NET team as a whole has shipped over the last 20 years, right? Not 20 years, obviously, but like the last 15 years. And so, like in many cases, we don't have the domain knowledge, like to even understand your problem, right? I mean, so you need to do some level of work to convince us that, oh, here's the problem that I can't solve today at all. I have to go to C++, or I can do it today, but it's like 30 lines of code, and this is what I want to do, and like this is like how 3 lines of code should look like ideal, and like getting that pitch right, so everybody who is not a domain expert can understand your pitch in like, let's say, 30 seconds to a minute, I think is something that makes our lives substantially easier.
There's a question to get to, but just one comment. In case you don't know, every area label, like sort of area, system, runtime, or whatever, has a couple of designated owners. If you go to the main CoreFX homepage to the README, scroll down, there's like a section like issue guide or issue owners. If you click on that, it lists all the owners, so you can see who the 2 owners of crypto, for example. Those guys or women are like the people that you want to talk to if you want to refine a proposal. They're really the ones who are responsible for marking it ready for review. And so feel free to like cite them by name so that they'll turn up. I think people pretty.
But they usually do.
They usually do, but like if it's gone quiet, that's the way to make the issue alive again. Is ping those folks, or me if nothing, if they don't. The question from Kevin is: there was some talk about moving proposals out of the CoreFX repo and into their own repo, like C# Lang. Has there been any more thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent a little bit of time thinking about that, but nothing like popped to my head. I think, I mean, the reason why the Roslyn team did it was that language design and compiler implementation are fundamentally very different exercises, and language design in itself is engineering, like understanding the type system implications of changes and all of that. I think on our side, I'm not sure it's helping or hurting, honestly. Like to me, it's like we could move it out. I mean, the hope would be that we have fewer issues to look at because we only talk about proposals, not any single bug or every single build break. I'm not sure it is.
Yeah, then that's something that can be easily kind of worked around by the queries on the labels. So
to the right things.
Yeah.
So if there would be, if you guys think about some stuff that would really help, if that was out, we would like to hear about that, definitely. But we are not. I personally am pretty much on the same boat. Don't see much advantage of actually moving out at this moment.
I think Imo's point is good that compiler implementation and bugs and language design are really quite separate things. And the difference is less clear cut for me. And certainly, it would not be clear to me where work goes because much of the feature work we do involves adding API. Right. It feels weird to track feature work separate from bugs. That's both work for us, and it has like a single queue for a developer. So that would be a disadvantage.
On top of that, like there's enhancement, like making something faster, right? That's not new API. That's just like
an API can transmute into.
So and that's basically feature as well as could be larger. So suddenly it's kind of weird split a little bit. So
we need to make it more discoverable.
I think the other point I want to raise is that if you look at our community right now, like in our GitHub organization, it is still very much like the good old centralized version control days, right? Where there's one master of everything, right? And like there's one, area everybody goes to essentially. So the sync point is essentially us, right? Like we are the ones that are arbitrating between all the different feature requests, right? Versus if you compare this to how the Linux kernel works, is that they have much more of a tree organization where they have like, there's Linus who owns the overall kernel design as the kernel architect, but like if you want to add like a tiny sub feature to the USB driver, you don't talk to Linus. Like you talk to whoever who owns the USB driver subsystem, right? And that allows them also to be more efficient when it comes to making decisions because the people that make the decisions are closer to the metal and they are faster with making those decisions. But it also allows communities to be built that are not just Linus, right? Somebody else can say, I care about something Linus doesn't care about, and they can come up with a proposal, and then it's just the fact that, does Linus approve or disapprove of this thing? But it's a slightly different work model. I'm not convinced that we have reached the point where we need some sort of organization, where we would need that. But I think it is true that it is very hard for the community to organize themselves. I mean, we have done similar things with CoreFX Lab, where we try to build these islands of like super experimental stuff where some team members from our team, but with ASP.NET or some other team members collaborate on very specific issues. But we haven't done this, in larger areas. And it seems to me there's some design issues that we have seen here, or design proposals where nobody in our team right now feels like the drive to drive that idea. Right? It seems not like a bad idea, but it's also not like something that we are passionate about and like spearheading, like moving forward, right? And I think it seems that for the community, it would be good if we would have had some venue where they can discuss these things in some somewhat centralized fashion. Versus if they do it in our repo, well, we own the issue, so they can moderate themselves, right? Like it's a bit of a problem, but I don't.
Do you need moderation for discussion, honestly?
Well, not maybe not, but I think there is this, I think there's this similar to the, how, homes work, right? If I come to your home, I'm a guest in your home. I'm not going to like clean up your fridge or like apply labels, right? So, I mean, label application is actually a good point.
Yeah.
It would be nice if you could at least organize your own stuff, right? And unfortunately, with the GitHub permission model, like, we can't separate code permissions from issue permissions, but but that's kind of like what I'm thinking would be required in order for us to really tell the community, go organize yourself before you come with a pre-baked thought. And like today, that's a bit harder to actually pull off. I mean, strictly speaking, anybody can fork CoreFX and can say, I care about area X, and then we can help amplify them, like by tweeting about them, by pointing to the repo or whatever. And then they could basically be, I don't know, like people that care about X that we don't care about, and then they could have proposals and issues there, right?
And then flow back when it's kind of
back
ready.
when the field is ready. Now, the only concern I have of that model is that what happens if we say no? Like, what happens if they come after like 3 months and then we still think like, you know what, it doesn't feel ready, and like
or right, or like it doesn't fit or something, right?
And then this is the nice thing if you collaborate early, that you can figure out like what the principles are that your solution has to adhere to, but it has the downside that it takes longer, right? Like, I mean, sometimes it's better to say, let me prototype something, let me build something, and then when I think it's ready, I can make a much more compelling push for it than I can with an abstract.
So we also said that we talk about. I'm just trying to check the time.
Next topic. Yep.
Yeah.
I was about to cut off Imo's.
There'll be a big chunk for questions at the end. So
yes, that's what we want. So the next topic was the large community contributions. So in the post, I mentioned a couple of them. So in the past, or in the last year, half a year, we had signed XML and serial port coming through. Actually, we had like originally it's in progress, but right now in drawing had like significant community contributions, and like a couple of people working together and with us. On directory services, I think there have been some as well. So that was that was nice. There's, by the way, in progress, the fast SSL stream. Tim Seaward is actually helping, or actually fully working on that feature, but it's a kind of larger feature. I think it was like basically last time it is 1 month's work, and now it drags for quite longer to finish it off. Which I don't mean anything bad by that, by the way. And there are actually things. Another ongoing thing is right now FreeBSD port with the kind of with the help of FreeBSD community, Mono at FreeBSD. So if someone is interested, like joining that, might be fun.
I mentioned Raspberry Pi as well.
Yeah, that was actually community driven. There's many other examples. Yeah. Okay, so do you have any other?
Put me on the
Okay, Raspberry Pi. All right. I should mention our Raspberry Pi. So anyway, so that's just a list which everyone could read from the issue. So it's not that super exciting. I wonder, what people think about like how to best announce those things. Do we have enough of them? I would be very interested in feedback and opinions of contributors actually on this topic.
There's been other efforts like this, like usually like issues where there's a whole bunch of like checkboxes, right? And I mean, one that comes to mind is removing dead code. There were some others, and I think my impression is, and I'd be interested to hear from contributors, is that by and large it's all gone really well. I mean, they've really been helpful to us. It's not, it's a huge force multiplier, and there's some folks who have just made really substantial contributions in their area, and I feel like this has been really, really gone well.
So I think that today it's pretty easy to go and find issues that are up for grabs that no one has started on, and are on the list of things to do, but the actual CoreFX and CoreCLR team might not get to the immediate future. But it's not very easy to go and locate things like this, which are in progress but needs volunteers.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should have a needs more volunteers tag.
That's a good feedback. Yeah.
Folks online, feel free to let us know what you think.
Would it help if we would have a markdown file with like that table essentially in?
I don't even know if a markdown file would definitely help to centralize it, but even just a label that you could query through GitHub to help find this would help as well.
Yeah, the reason why I suggest a markdown file is that like if you have a table where you see description and then a problem, like it's like a short summary, it may be easier for people to say, oh, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z, rather than going through a query and then like trying to like figure out what's the status of this issue.
I like that idea actually. Because then kind of like running larger projects and stuff. My question would be much more are contributors, are you guys online like interested in like working more on something larger, or are you rather happy at like, yeah, I fix bug here, bug there, add an API? I'm not saying that that's super small. Sometimes it takes even a week, right? But what are your preferences? Because I've seen some like Hubie and a couple of contributors actually saying like hey, I would like to work on something larger. Like actually James Coe as well mentioned that. So.
Well, and related, while folks are typing, another question in my mind is there's some contributors like you who just seem to be happy to just jump all over and just find some new place and they contribute. And then there's some folks who really specialize in a certain technology, like this. There's some people who really do link. There's a couple of people like Tanner who really focused on numerical stuff. Who was a great collaborator on the serial port, who's really just done serial port work. I wonder if there's some way we can or should kind of recognize who those experts are, kind of community area contributors, right? Recognize those people.
Right. No questions on the live chat.
Either that or it's not working.
Yeah, keep in mind that it's slightly delayed, right? I still see Dan talking. So it's like at least I think 5 to 10 seconds a day. So if they ask a question, you have to.
You want to introduce yourself, Tanner? While we're...
I'm Tanner. I'm on the project system team on Roslyn, and I frequently contribute to the math and numeric sections of CoreFX.
Where does your interest in math and numerics come from, by the way? Or an expertise?
It's just a hobby interest of mine.
Yeah, and actually for to explain it for people, like Tanner is actually doing contributions to CoreFX kind of in his free time. It's not part of his job, so that's why we sometimes treat him more as an external contributor.
Well, and numerics is actually a great example of where we don't have deep technical expertise on the team, right? I mean, we have area owners who are responsible for code and fixing things, and Eric Molino's pretty knowledgeable, but folks like you, and there was another user, DCW user, who have actual experience in doing numerical work. I mean,
we're more than happy to listen actually to these people, and it doesn't have to be that they are actually right now, sitting one floor underneath us, right? Like Tanner. So more than happy to actually listen to community experts. Get some questions. So John would love to work on some larger features, but I do not find it difficult to find out about, though. I do find it difficult. Okay.
One thing, I mean, going back to the topic of area experts, I'm sometimes conflicted as to whether to invoke people's names because, there's a bug or something and I could really use their input on it, but they're not getting paid. And I don't know if they want it. It's like, if there's a test failure that's heavily related to a change in it, I don't think they actually broke it. I want to ask, do you think what this might be? But I also don't want to take people for granted.
And don't appear rude, hey, I expect you to work on that, right?
Obligation. So some people I can't really read whether they want that or not. Some people like it, I guess.
Maybe in combination of so we already have the code owners for people on CoreFX, CoreCLR. Maybe we could have a community code owners where you initially start by showing that you have expertise in the area by helping out with those types of issues. And then if you've done it enough, then you can either request personally or one of us can ask them, would you like to be part of the community people who are tagged on these types of issues?
Yeah, I mean,
and then you can just do
that's a great
/ numerics experts, because we've got a JIT contrib already, and that's got community members as well for community members that like and know how to contribute to the JIT.
Right.
And having that for other areas.
That's actually a good idea, even in our ownership page, having hey, community interested people or something like that, right? One more column or something.
Right.
So, and by the way, we have actually for the owners, I've said it multiple times, but we have basically a tooling which sends them emails like, hey, something is new in your area, so they don't have to monitor the entire repo. And we actually have a couple of community members who reached out to me, like Tim Seward and actually our Red Hat friends and others, who are actually on some of those emails as well per their request. So that's something that these kind of community interested people in some area might be interested in as well, getting notification, hey, what's happening in my area.
We could essentially have groups for the area owners, right? So instead of going to look at the page, I can just do area owner numerics or something, and those two people would get summoned, or maybe the one group includes everybody.
That might not be a bad idea as well. So. Yeah,
you could actually create teams. You can tag the whole team.
Are they like, well, you would have to find out if it's kind of per repo / per organization. Maintenance of those things, yeah, might be interesting and challenging. But yeah, if it works, I don't.
I mean, we could just have a naming prefix in the team. So I mean, the teams are global and
CoreFX dash something. Yeah. Sure.
There was that issue with the perf of link sorting, and I'm like at John Hanna because he's always touching those things. But there's absolutely no reason why he should, necessarily want to have anything to do with that. If I could do at, link area interested parties, that would be easier.
And I believe members of those groups can leave themselves if they so desire. They just can't add themselves.
Yeah, well, then ask actually, Emo, how is it about adding, contributors to actually those groups? Because I think that they have to be member of the organization, and there's GitHubisms that are not so super nice.
So there's a fundamental issue of GitHub permissions that effectively, in order to add anybody to a team, they have to be a member of the org. Now, we could make people members of the org and not give them access to anything. I mean, that's technically possible, but it means that they all get the badge org member, right? So that gets, at some point, it becomes indistinguishable from who's actually an org member versus who just happens to be in the community and happens to be somebody who wanted to tag about a team. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, we have talked with GitHub before about that. I mean, like when they were here a few months ago, we raised some of the permission concerns that we have, and they're looking into making it a bit more streamlined for larger organizations to deal with their communities without making them team members. But yeah, so far it has been a one-off thing. I mean, we can add people to individual repos as one-offs without making them org members, but there's not really a way to do it.
Tim's at external.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tim mentioned that email system you're sending me are great, but your Python thing doesn't email external folks, right?
If Tim is external, he's getting emails.
From your Python system? Oh, okay.
There's no Python. It's C#. But please. Yeah.
I'm actually sending notifications about Linux actually to Red Hat people because they were interested.
I didn't know there's a way for external people. How do they get on those emails?
They have to send me email.
I see.
Ask me. So yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's worth everyone knowing, I guess. If you want to get emails about changes to issues in a particular area, just email Carol and they'll set you up with.
Carol@Microsoft.com. We also accept bribes.
They don't have enough GIFs. Feedback we're getting from the community folks.
Yeah, about that.
I'll let you work on that one.
How do I say it? GIFs or GIFs?
Oh, don't start.
I think some of this information would also, like, if you want to get added to these lists, or if you want to be added to the mail list that Carol has, this would be information that'd be useful for us to have on the contributing page.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, honestly, the tooling is kind of a little bit hacky, and sometimes it doesn't work for 3 days. I just today have to resurrect it and that stuff because it's basically on the side job that is not officially funded, unfortunately, and it needs better investment. I have actually GitHub project for that, but no time and that stuff. But yeah, I think we're ready. I'm ready to extend it to a few more people, like whoever is kind of already existing contributor in GitHub and showed at least some of the contributions. I'm more than happy to do.
One thing we'd like to make happen, but we have had no success yet, is trying to get more interest within Microsoft. Because Microsoft has probably more GitHub repos than anyone else, and yet we're all inventing our own tools. So we're going to meet again with the VS Code people, right? Because they don't have an email system. There's probably something of theirs that we can rip off.
I hope that they have the need now. I hope. I tried to actually convince Jock to invest into that area, and his first thing is like, why? I'm like, okay. So yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like, there certainly is a tooling concern with some of the open source stuff that we are having, and then, like, GitHub does not lead itself to something that scales very well to like thousands of repos, right? I think when we talked to GitHub, I think we said that he had like 8,000 repos or something, like across all our orgs, which is quite a bit.
Well, actually, mention of projects makes me think. We have used internally, but I don't know if we've externally talked about it. Is some folks from time to time use ZenHub.
Yeah.
We tried like some of the others, like Waffle, and they all have pros and cons. I think various reasons we settle on ZenHub. Some of the private repos we have, there's very few of those, but there's a couple on our team that use ZenHub. And so if folks are interested in that, or it's acceptable to people to install that extension, we could potentially use that to manage projects with community folks as well.
Yeah, while I'm talking to the contributors, like I would be curious what you guys' thoughts, you guys being in the community right now, thoughts are on mailing lists in general. Like, is mailing list something you would rather not use at all? Would you prefer GitHub issues, or would you prefer if you would have also a mailing list that allows a little bit more structure, maybe? Like I'm asking because Miguel, for example, coming from the Unix/Linux open source world, almost all the mono stuff was done via mailing list and still is to this day. And right now, I think the driver just crashed.
I think we should use Windows next time.
I am using Windows.
Without Mac hardware. Seems to be the weak point.
So I think, Sarah, you have to repeat what you just said, because I think you cut out right when we talked about that.
Are we online?
Yeah, online again, yeah.
Yeah, so like I was saying, I believe the primary issue with when Roslyn tried to use mailing list was, one, the community wasn't really asked first. That was one feedback. And the other was that people didn't want to have to manage tracking this stuff across 2, 3, or 4 different places. They wanted to be able to centrally use one system. They wanted to be able to link issues and PRs together, etc., and GitHub was the answer for that. There was a couple other suggestions that were closed that had integration with GitHub and stuff, but GitHub ended up being the easiest to use, even with some of the issues that GitHub does have.
So online, GitHub may not be 100% ideal, but more systems even less ideal. Keep, don't make us go to another place. Mailing list is 2017. Xamarin and Mono use mailing lists a lot, right?
Yep. I mean, I think part of the problem with mailing lists is that the mailing list tools are like literally from the 80s. I mean, when I signed up to one of the mono mailing lists, you get a warning that says don't use a strong password because you stored in clear text on the server. Like the mailing list tools that are still in vogue on the Linux side are a bit weird, but to me it's less about the tooling. I mean, we could probably use Exchange hosted distribution groups if we cared enough. But the question is, like, do we think mailing list is the right model to begin with, regardless of the tooling? I mean, there's always this problem with mailing lists. I think kind of hinted on that, is that like there's no history, right? Like, I mean, there's publicly archival of those things, but like browsing these mailing lists archive is horrible. Yeah, pretty bad. And so when you at the moment you sign up, you start getting email, but you have no idea what people are responding to. It's
I agree. To GitHub is probably the way to go, but it's the least worst, right? I mean, it doesn't have any good way to have threaded discussions. And
so I think the downside of GitHub is, and I mean that's why I'm still asking about mailing lists, is that mailing lists have particular problems. But what I find on GitHub is that, first of all, you cannot really delete, right? If I delete, I delete for everybody, right? But in email, my inbox, I can do whatever I want, so I can keep my own focus. So there's a thread I don't care about, but maybe Carol cares about, I can delete the thread, so I can keep my own sanity by only looking at the stuff that I care about, right? Which is much harder to do on GitHub because you kind of have to select threads, but there's no history of like what I already looked at. Like keeping up to date with GitHub is just fundamentally hard.
I think, at least from talking to some of the other people on the Roslyn team, one of the things that we wish GitHub had the most was an actual forum like CodePlex had, because issues aren't always the best place to discuss an idea. And I've said this a few times. I think the only difference between us as Microsoft employees and the community is that we're able to discuss our issues and ideas with people who know before we post it on the internet.
Right.
So that's why all the ideas we post end up looking at least decent at first, and half the ideas the community post up may not. It's because they've not had the chance to discuss that. And I think people think when it goes into an issue that that's an actual fleshed out idea, and that's not necessarily the case. A lot of times it's just a discussion on, let's flesh this out because I have an idea, but I need to know what other people think about it.
That actually begs a question for community folks is, do we do a good enough job of keeping our discussions transparent? Like, how often does it feel like, oh, apparently some discussion happened there, and then Microsoft folks weigh in with the result of that? I mean, inevitably, we talk to each other, and that's probably a good thing. But I hope there aren't many cases where there's a big discussion and then we come back with a decision or something without really enough transparency.
Well, we did that in one or two cases in the last half a year, but on purpose, because it was just unmanageable. I think it was around the priority queue and something like that. There are times when actually it's good to take it offline, but it's a good question. Like, if people feel that it's used more than, rare cases, I would definitely want to know.
I think to me, the biggest challenge with GitHub is that like GitHub issues are like bugs, right? They're like things of a number you can track, right? That's the purpose of GitHub issues. I think the thing we are missing is basically the structured way for discussions, right? And I mean, the best tool that people know of and have in the daily lives integrated is email, like for better or worse, right? I mean, even internally, most of the stuff we do is via email, even though we can't meet each other usually. We still do a ton of stuff over email because it is easier to like express thoughts in email than it is to do it in a meeting. I think IM, I think Tim suggested this, Gitter is not a replacement because IM is like face to face, right? It's like if you can't do face to face, you do IM. But I think it's the same thing. It's impossible in a Gitter chat to make a structured proposal.
There's other issues with. To be honest, I don't go on Gitter anymore. One is that it's yet another place. Like, it would help if it was integrated right there.
Yes.
And another is that because we're distributed and we've all got day jobs, we're not necessarily there at the same time, and so it becomes really disjoint. I think ideally, there would be a forum like for people interested in networking or something in CoreFX. There's a lot of things GitHub to do. I mean, and we've made representations before, right? And we could talk to, asking for things, and we probably could have another shot at talking to the Microsoft open source people who, I guess, contract with GitHub and see if we can ask for things.
Yeah, and I think at the very least beyond that, it would be helpful if there was a way to indicate that this is, and this partially relies on the community doing so, but the ability to say that this is just a basic idea, we need to discuss it first, and I need to discuss it with the experts. Like, half of my ideas and proposals for the C# Lang repo have only been accepted because I went down to Jared's office down the hall and talked to him for half an hour to flesh out the idea before I posted it. And there needs to be a way to say, like, hey, I have this basic idea. I need to discuss it with the community experts when they have some time, even if it's just one-on-one, if that's possible. And then once I have an understanding of why this would or would not work, then I can make an actual proposal.
Would it make sense, I'm just brainstorming, to have kind of office hours for a particular area, like a major, like you could have a particular hour, 4 o'clock on Friday or something, when the networking folks are in a Gitter channel. I mean, they're in their office working, but like if people want to have a live discussion with the devs who work on it and other community people interested, I think that would be a time. Maybe that's worth an experiment. I don't know. Or maybe it could just be a particular hour and Gitter that anyone on CoreFX can talk about.
Technically speaking, we kind of have that. It's very rarely used, but we had a couple of occasions when actually the discussion over GitHub was like, so muddy and like so unclear. And we thought that it's not probably, might be a good idea that we actually took it offline, even with the community members. Tim is actually one example of that. Tim Seaward, he was part of one of the LPN, or none of the LPN. Anyway, one of the around SSL stream proposals, API discussion. We had actually PG Olebowski as part of the discussion around the priority queue, or at least we chatted offline. So when it's needed, it happens, but it's rare. So maybe I think something more, hey, if you have something office hours like once a month.
Yeah, well, I mean,
maybe this is the place, right?
I'm working and I don't have to say anything unless it's relevant, and we could have office hours 10 to 11 Tuesday and Thursday or whatever, and anyone can join and to see what, I mean, I don't know, like, did people think
that's actually helping, because I think I don't know, in order
we lose track of the discussion, right?
First of all that, but also secondly, I don't think it's FaceTime. I really think it's like if somebody, let's say, proposes, I mean, here's a great example. I just went to Cologne at the conference. Some guy talked to me and said he doesn't want to, like he's sick in his code base. He always has to use these, constructed generic types, and he wants to, he has a dictionary of tuple of blah, and like these super convoluted types, right? And he wants to basically use a using alias with them, but still parameterize some one of the generic types. And you can do this in C#. So I started an email thread with the C# language design team and said, so here's something that I heard, and here's the 3 or 4 things that he tried to do. Like, what are you guys' thoughts on that? And like, nobody already has a design in mind. Right? People just asking to say, so we could do type defs, we could do this, we could do that, and like it seems like we probably should do type defs, but like it's not a baked idea. And I think people also have to chew on this for a while. Like I don't think even people in the C# language design don't necessarily have already the answer for that question. They have to think about that, sleep over that, and like write up their thoughts. And sometimes this happens with Matt's as well. I mean, he just published his current thoughts on level reference types and like how that would look like, right? And I think for complicated design, you need something that I think is offline in the sense that it is, not face to face or IM where you have to come up with the answer on the spot. You can sleep over that, think about it, and then reply. So I think something like either email or a forum or something that is structured for conversation, I think is the right venue to do these design things. I also think it's better to do them via GitHub issues because GitHub issues imply they immediately they're like armed bombs, right? They're now ticking. There's like a time ticking essentially because it has a status and people are now getting nervous. Nothing's happening here. But also GitHub threads are flat. Like I mean, like if you have like 100+ comments on an issue, the issue is effectively done. Right? Like there's no more way you can browse this in a meaningful fashion. And I think some of the designs will need 3, 4, 5 iterations before the design materializes into something useful. And I really think that we cheat a lot on our stuff because we do this internally over email. We do this internally in meetings. And then, as Tanner said, like once we have something halfway decently designed, then it's when we go to GitHub, right? And I think that doesn't work, I think, for the community and also doesn't really work for us. Like I think people are also sick of like porting their markdown files from repo A to repo B and like, the emails from email to GitHub. Like it's all work that seems to be something you could avoid if you just had a venue that happens to be public.
I think that's kind of one of the things where the C# lang repo helps. It helps separate actual work items from proposals and discussions.
Right.
Because the C# lang repo allows people to create issues, and then the Mads and Neil in particular are pretty good about going through and saying, labeling this as discussion, proposal, etc. People are allowed to discuss it. Then they're expected, once the discussion has been finished, to go and create a formal proposal that has to fit the actual template, essentially, with rationale and example usage and everything else. And then once that's been championed, a separate champion issue is created. You check in the speclet for that, and then you're allowed to go and work on it in the actual repo as soon as LVM says it's good.
Yeah, I think we kind of have that now. We have a .NET/designs repo where the idea is that people submit pull requests with like an actual document that is something like a speclet. I feel like for language design and for some of the like the recent thing we had was like how would the JIT expose hardware intrinsics, right? Like for complicated areas, I think that heavyweight process is justified. I think for many of the things our community does, they're like in this interim state where you don't want to write a full spec. You also don't know what the issue is yet. It may take just 5, 6 like iterations, but I feel like this middle ground GitHub has no story because you either go down all the way with markdown files as pull requests where you literally submit a spec, or you have these super lightweight comments that like the whole thing in the middle that there's a lot of stuff that is in there. I don't think has a good representation. And also people just have questions. I mean, like how do you deal with questions? Like do you file an issue and say I have a question? Like this whole thing doesn't exist on GitHub at all.
Well, yes, that's why we have label question.
But people can track it themselves, right? So like it's always a bit of like, am I allowed to ask a question? Like some people like that. I mean, like that's.
I tend to, on my own projects, prefix the issue with like bracket question or bracket proposal or bracket bug,
right.
To at least help distinguish them before they can go and be tagged with the appropriate label, since community can't label things themselves.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's actually helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that we do that in both CoreFX and CoreCLR to some extent with things like this is Ryujit or this is ARM or this is.
Right. Yep. That's true too.
Maybe just like helping request that users do that when it happens, and we'll have to do that for like.
We can actually put it in the issue template eventually. But
if we have to do it, we have to do it. But I worked in databases where everything's prefixed, and it certainly makes it harder to read.
Well, you don't necessarily. The way I do it is request that the community prefix it, and then once whoever triages it goes and adds the label, remove the prefix.
So it's kind of help for labeling,
but
working around the fact that community cannot change the labels themselves. Yeah.
It would require a little bit of work on both sides, but just like with moving language design issues to C# laying out of Roslyn, after the first 100 PRs were closed and told you need to file this over here, import it with ZenHub or whatever, the community kind of got the idea, and we hardly ever see language proposals on Roslyn now. We see them all open on the correct place with the correct structure, etc. For most of them, at least.
I think process is fine. I think every repo, every technology has their own process and how they do things, and everybody kind of expects a section to README or a specific file that they have to read before they submit issues. And some people get offended when you tell them that they did it the wrong way, but I think that's just how things are. I mean, I'm just not sure we actually have a meaningful process for these kinds of things. I mean, we could continue going down the GitHub issue path, but I don't know.
It doesn't seem like we have a clear consensus on whether we need a CoreFX API.
So Ben is actually voting for it. I'm interested. Anyone else on the chat can say +1 on Ben's, hey, I want that too.
Kevin, I'm not paid by ZenHub, but there is a button if you install that, and there's other extensions that allow you to move issues.
Yeah, Google wrote a thing that I think it's called GitHub IssueMover.net or something. That's the URL you can go to.
It's kind of crummy because the old one still says that it's closed, and the new one's kind of replayed.
Yes.
But it works, and it's just one click. So.
Yeah.
I guess Nick is gonna knock on GitHub's door very soon.
Yeah, Nick, go for it, man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually, funny enough, did we actually mention moving issues with GitHub?
I don't think so.
I don't think we did, funny enough. But yeah, I mean, there certainly is an issue, but I mean, yeah, no pun intended. I think on our side, what we should do probably is decide whether we have a separate repo for API related things, and we already have the notes repo. Maybe we can just repurpose that one. That would be one way to do it. Force it down, yeah.
Folks are coming out.
And then the other one was, what do we do with questions? And I mean, we can just say, you know what, it's GitHub for now because we don't have any other alternative that is viable. I mean, we do have the .NET Foundation forums in case anybody hasn't noticed, but that's part of the problem. It's too far away logically. I mean, it's forums.net Foundation.
Yet another system, basically.
Yeah, it's not connected. It's not part of the flow, right? But there is a forum you could go to.
I don't see many votes. Maybe Ben and maybe Jonathan. Not sure if his +1 was for that. So I would probably right now don't see it as a large community interest into moving APIs to.
I'm not against it, but I think it starts off with a -100 points thing because there's a cost to it,
yes.
And
non-trivial. And teaching everyone.
I already heard cats to get all the devs to look regularly at their labels. And then,
yeah. All right, so we have 10 minutes remaining. Anyone has any random question? Just rambled a little bit about various stuff.
Is there anything that you guys feel like we should discuss that we haven't even brought up?
Why is it 25? That looks like Victor.
Yes, it's okay. Victor, based on the picture.
Victor's on my team, but he's under an alias today. He forgot to change his picture, apparently.
You just read him out, man. No questions. Are we gonna end sooner, I guess?
So I kind of have a question or comment related to the first topic we went over.
API reviews?
Yeah.
Process? Okay.
I guess one of the things that I've noticed is that I I don't want to start work on a API until after it's been reviewed, because I don't want to waste my own time or your guys' time doing work that's not going to be accepted unless it's particularly trivial. And on top of that, there's sometimes, especially in the areas I'm interested in, my changes are cross-cutting in that they also end up touching core CLR because they require intrinsic support today. Although maybe with hardware intrinsics that will become easier. What is the recommended way to help push the proposal forward after it has been marked as?
I would tag someone like me, Carol, Imo, and
We have FXDC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and does that go to us?
Yeah.
Or is it, okay.
Basically,
Yeah, just tag it. Like I've never found anyone kind of misusing tags. Like I get 100 tags a day, right? It's totally fine to say, hey guys, you ignoring this, or hey, hey, I know there's a bunch ahead of me in the queue, but like I'd love to work on this, and I can do that pretty soon. If you guys have a chance to look at it sooner, I think that's completely reasonable. That was what I would do.
And to be honest, like whoever tags me that I know the name because the person worked on 1 or 2 issues at least, like I have no problem helping anyone even push things forward and that stuff. Yeah, because that sometimes things don't get the right attention. It's because there's as well lots of things. It's like, oh, this I want to do this, and you look at it like, well, that doesn't really belong to CoreFX. Like, really? But how do I say no to that? And then you start arguing, you get lost in that. So yeah, that's why kind of some of the higher value, higher quality kind of things might get lost, and that applies to bug reports. That applies actually to API proposals and everything. So.
And are you interested in ones after you've already tagged them as ready for review?
Well, the particular case on my end was I had the math API, which we reviewed Tuesday, and that sat around for like a month with no update. And even as a Microsoft employee, I had no clue where it was in the queue, what APIs were ahead of it, why they might be ahead of it, or when.
So little dirty secret is that there's no queue, which we set, right? And we sometimes, new things that actually need to get into next release, we kind of prioritize over. I think that in May, between January to May, actually we were able to get to basically 0 pending things that we had almost everything in 2 weeks approved or reviewed. As I said, like we have a backlog over summer, so we're gonna go through that. Once we catch up, I believe that we're gonna be again in the mode that we can deal with everything. Yes, we're in
0 every week, but it's never gonna.
Yeah, we have said
it's near 0, like
and you of course can come to the meeting. So
I get invited
to any of us, and if you turn up, it's kind of hard to not look at your issue, right? Plus, to me, it's a big draw. If someone's willing to work on something, I'm pretty motivated.
Yeah. And I guess that's the other thing. It's not always clear on the issues today when a community member proposes something, whether they're proposing it because they think it's a good idea or whether they're proposing it because it's blocking them or whether it's one of the above and they're also willing to implement it. I know with all my API proposals, I'm almost always willing to implement it end-to-end, both in the runtime and the framework, along with all the tests and perf and everything else. But it's not always clear when that's the case for other proposals.
So I've seen a couple of people saying like, hey, I'm willing to implement it. On the other hand, for me, if it's a good API, I don't care if that person signs up, right? It's usually like if we approve something, then we say like, hey, someone wants to, implement it, and usually I expect that the person who filed it like say, oh yeah, of course I'm. Finally you approved my thing. Yeah, I'm here ready for last month, right?
Well, so obviously it wouldn't make any difference, I hope, to whether we approve it.
Exactly.
But I think if someone says, hey, I have time pretty soon to work on this if you're interested, I mean, that gives it a +1.
Technically speaking, yeah, we don't mind if we have like 200 approved APIs which are just waiting for implementation. That's okay. So if someone is ready to implement it, doesn't change the outcome of the API review itself.
But I mean, like the ability to say that so that it moves higher up in the priority list for things
tag
to
us.
review.
Yeah, that's true from the priority perspective. Yeah, the other actually trick I use that because I was on vacation, unfortunately, or out for most summer. Before summer, I know that I did. actually prior to the meeting, actually looked at the issues, and I kind of looked at, okay, these are simple, they will be very non-controversial, so kind of move them higher up, and then through the either unclear or more difficult, kind of have them go through the rest. So again, there are various techniques, and I much more hope that we're gonna get very soon into the point that we don't have so many. But even 70 is not that bad. Imo told me stories that more than a year ago they actually used to have 5 pages of the ready for review, which is 100
we have
issues,
17 now.
Was, so I think that from that perspective we're in golden state, of course.
It's also interesting. We have 45 that are approved. So those folks either they didn't notice it got approved, or they don't have an interest in implementing it.
And that's okay,
which is fine.
And I guess the other thing is it's not always clear for. Sometimes there's large proposals like the hardware intrinsics proposal where the general shape for the API, but you're not going to go and print out every single API in that list because that's essentially as difficult as implementing it. For example, the original one from Intel only covered the vectorized forms. And so, of course, after discussion with VG and Emo and Eric and everyone else, I created the proposal for the scalar version because that's going to be needed for its own things. But of course, that's also several hundred APIs, not going to list them all out, just going to list the shape. What's the best way to indicate?
So I haven't seen that almost at all. I've seen, and people usually do the reasonable thing. I've seen actually James Co recently actually did something and yeah, there's gonna be 20 more functions like that. And actually it was it's not clear which of them. So I asked him can you please make the full list? But of course we asked him at the moment was clear okay, this seems to be good and ready for review, but it would be good to kind of see the full list, right? So I think that people are doing reasonable things, and we're reasonable as well. We're not kind of bunch of bureaucrats, right? So
I mean, I think that this is fundamentally the difference between community-driven stuff and internal stuff. When internal stuff happened, we would decide, okay, we want hardware intrinsics. So the question is just how. And then somebody will code up something. They will basically get to the point where they have the full thing.
Yeah.
And then they will bring us the full thing, and then we can say, okay, the namespace is all wrong. Why do you put everything on one type? Or you should have one type for feature area, like feedback like that, right? And then it will restructure that stuff. But for the most part, in many cases, Roslyn is another great example. The first time we took a look at Roslyn, they already had 20,000 APIs. And they didn't come to us when they were talking about, well, how would we potentially expose the parser? They already said, okay, we have syntax tree APIs, we have semantic model. They already had the full thing figured out at that point. And I think in many cases, I think the API reviews would be better if the person submitting that already has a design thought out, because I think you're way better to explain the design. You're way better to sketch a design, even if you don't want to sketch the full thing. Even if Roslyn would come today, we wouldn't force them to put a markdown file of 20,000 APIs in a GitHub issue. That's pointless, right? At that point, you find another way to do it. But for the most part, most of the API review requests that we get are small APIs, small tweaks, right? But most of our work
20 is probably the top I have seen.
Most of the work that we do is not necessarily reviewing the API. Most of the work we spend on is should we even do the feature? Is the feature good? Does the feature make sense for the BCL, or should it be somebody else's library on top? That's 50% of the API review, which we never do internally. Internally, it's never this should we do the feature at all because it's not our call. But for community-driven stuff, it always ends up being 50% is the bar check, and the other 50% is the actual feedback on the design.
I would just say we don't do it internally because mostly those questions are kind of pre-approved almost, or pre-answered. Right?
Yeah, they're some other business owner.
When there's already strong need, you don't discuss that, and we don't get the really crazy internal questions. I just want to. This doesn't mean that whoever is inside Microsoft is privileged, but those people are usually kind of self-filtering themselves early on. Okay. All right, we ran out of time.
So before we go, I want to show one more thing.
I have one more question.
Brendan on Twitter found the API in Web Archive, and you can see the original obsolescence comment there before we fixed the comment. This is just a temporary workaround. The TL provides a public but hidden API to check whether an application is targeting public profile.
The obsolete attribute.
The obsolescence attribute. like now it says this is an infrastructure API that's not supposed to be called from your code. And, it's funny how like the internet never forgets, right? All your sins are recorded.
So what did it say before? Sorry, I forget.
So this is what it said before. This is the web archive version.
I see.
The current version says infrastructure don't call.
Okay.
So
we're working on. Yeah.
Maybe you're going to ask this, Cal, but I wanted to know whether this is useful.
Yes, that's something like that. I want to actually, we probably resolved that already last time. I expect that people will not listen and come next time if it's not useful. We plan to do one more in roughly 1 to 2 months, and I would actually encourage everyone to go and vote on the topics or add more, so that it's actually useful for you. And if we don't get eventually any topics or any votes, we know that no one is interested in anything.
Victor, what you're describing is basically the week in .NET that Bertrand used to. Do we still do that?
Yep, Bertrand still does it actually.
Bertrand still does it. So, are you familiar with that, Victor? It's on the .NET blog, and it's every week. Here's all the cool libraries and conferences and features.
Yeah, again, I'm not. I have to be honest, I'm not a fan. Like, as in, if you go on Channel 9 right now, there's like literally like 3 or 4 shows that basically do the same thing. You have 2 people going through a PowerPoint of screenshots of blog post links, and I'm like, I find that like, I mean, there's already enough content I think that does that. For our
doing it, and it's not us. So
I think it makes more sense because they're more product. Like we are more lower level pieces. I mean, there are not that many blog posts about how list of T works or how the JIT is implemented. I mean, there's a few every once in a while, but it's not something we can fill in on.
And we have that list in CoreCLR. Matt Warren actually started that. So.
Ben, to your question, Bertrand moved to another team in Microsoft. Where did he go? Azure?
Bertrand?
Yeah.
No, Bertrand moved to the Xamarin Designer team. He switched from PM to dev, so he's no longer leading email, he's committing code.
And doing shows.
And still doing that, yes.
All right.
All right, thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.
So again, please vote on the topics for next time if you're interested. This time we didn't get too many votes, so vote it up.
And everybody wave.
Whoever drew
and smile.
I did see your comments about the different API levels. Bye.
Bye-bye.